The scent of industrial-grade lemon and bleach was the only thing that felt real. It was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the low, guttural tones of the Japanese conversation happening just feet away. Lena pushed the mop across the polished marble floor, her movements economical and practiced. Back and forth, the swish of the wet fibers a steady rhythm against the rising tension in the room. She kept her eyes down, focused on the swirling gray water in her bucket. Invisibility was a uniform, and she wore it better than the gray overalls that were standard issue for the night crew. This was the penthouse office. The summit. The place where the real work of Shinjuku's most discreet technology empire, Omnicorp, was conducted. And here, the air was always thin, charged with unspoken threats and brutal calculus. At the head of the massive obsidian table sat the man who owned the air, the building, the entire city block. Kaito. She had never seen his face clearly, only impressions. The severe cut of his Tom Ford suit, a dark charcoal that seemed to drink the light. The way his hands rested on the table, one over the other, perfectly still. A sliver of intricate, blue-black ink peeked from the starched white cuff of his shirt, the tail of a dragon or a serpent. She wasn't sure. He didn't speak often, but when he did, the other men in suits just as sharp, with faces like stone masks, would go rigid. Tonight, the tension was a coiled wire. A man named Tanaka was sweating, a single bead tracing a path from his temple down his jaw. He was fumbling with a tablet, his voice strained as he tried to summarize its contents. "It's a proposal from the Kyokuryokai," Tanaka said, his Japanese formal and stiff. "They offer a truce, but the language is ambiguous. Poetic. It speaks of shared rivers and a single moon." A dismissive sound, barely audible, came from the head of the table. Kaito shifted in his chair, a minute adjustment that made the whole room hold its breath. "It is not poetic, Tanaka. It is an insult wrapped in a proverb. They are testing our reach. They believe we are blind to the West." He gestured to a specific paragraph on the tablet. "This phrase here, it's not standard. It's a regional dialect. From the old Osaka docks. Your translator is a Tokyo academic. He is useless." Tanaka paled. "Sir, we are working to find a specialist." Kaito's gaze swept the room, cold and dismissive. It passed over his lieutenants, over the expensive art on the walls, over the floor-to-ceiling window that showcased a glittering, indifferent Tokyo. And then it landed on Lena. She felt the weight of his eyes like a physical touch, a sudden pressure on her skin. She froze, mop handle clutched in her hands. He was looking at her, not through her, but at her. A slow, predatory smile touched his lips, a chilling thing that held no humor at all. It was the smile of a man about to pull the wings from a fly just to see what it would do. His men followed his gaze, their expressions a mixture of confusion and contempt. The janitor, the invisible girl with the bucket and mop. Kaito leaned forward, the fabric of his suit making no sound. He spoke in English, the first time she had ever heard him use the language. His voice was a low baritone, the accent precise, almost non-existent. "You," he said, the single word cutting through the silence. "You mop my floors every night. You must hear many things." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She kept her eyes on the floor. "I wear headphones, sir, a lie. Music was a distraction, and in this place, distractions got you killed." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Of course you do." He slid the tablet across the obsidian surface. It stopped a few feet from her bucket. "My men, with their expensive educations, seem to be struggling. Perhaps we need a fresh perspective." The men around the table bristled. One of them, a younger man with a cruel mouth, snorted. "Boss, she's the cleaner." Kaito's eyes didn't leave Lena. "Humor me," he gestured to the tablet again. "Can you read this?" It was a test. A game. A piece of casual cruelty to break the tension of his meeting and humiliate Tanaka further. She could say no. She could feign ignorance, shake her head, and go back to being invisible. That was the safe play, the smart play. But something in his condescending smirk, In the dismissive way his men looked at her, sparked a flicker of defiance deep in her soul. She had spent 4 years of her life, and tens of thousands of dollars in student loans she was still paying off, mastering this language. She had earned it. Slowly, she released the mop handle. It clattered softly against the bucket. She walked to the table, her worn rubber-soled shoes silent on the marble. She picked up the tablet. The screen was cold against her fingertips. The characters were dense, a mix of formal kanji and a scrawled, cursive script she recognized from her advanced studies. It was, as he'd said, an old dialect, full of maritime metaphors and coded threats. The phrase that had stumped them wasn't about shared rivers. It was about a single net pulling from 2 boats, an idiom that meant one side would inevitably capsize the other while pretending to cooperate. It was a declaration of war, disguised as a peace offering. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's climate control. Lena drew a breath, and she began to speak. She didn't just translate. She contextualized. Her voice, clear and steady, filled the vast office. It says, "The Kai Koryakai acknowledges the moon we share, but a net pulled from 2 boats will only feed one captain. The implication is that any partnership will end with them taking everything. They are not proposing a truce. They are telling you they will sink you while smiling." She pointed to another section. "And this part here, it mentions the old pier. That's not a location. It's a reference to a historical betrayal. The Watanabe clan, 1982. They use it as a code to signal they will strike at your most trusted ally first." When she finished, the silence that followed was different. It was heavier. Stunned. The smirks were gone, replaced by expressions of disbelief. Tanaka looked as if he'd been struck. Lena placed the tablet back on the table, her hand perfectly steady. She turned to retrieve her mop. "Stop." Kaito's voice was no longer amused. It was flat. Deadly. She turned back to face him. He was studying her now, his dark eyes narrowed, all traces of the game gone. He was looking at her as if he'd never seen her before. As if the janitor's uniform had dissolved, leaving something entirely new and unknown in its place. "Everyone out," he commanded, his voice soft but absolute. His men didn't hesitate. Chairs scraped back. They filed out of the room, not daring to look at Lena, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. The heavy glass door hissed shut, sealing the 2 of them inside. The penthouse was silent again. The view of Tokyo glittered behind him, a backdrop of a million distant lives that had nothing to do with this room. Kaito rose from his chair. He moved with a liquid grace that was unnerving in a man his size. He was a predator in his natural habitat. He stopped in front of her, so close she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something cold, like winter air. "Lena," he said, her name a quiet shock. He knew her name. "You have been mopping my floors for 6 months. Why have you never spoken?" "My job is to be silent," she replied, her voice a little tight. "Your job just changed." His gaze was intense, analytical. He was no longer seeing a piece of furniture. He was seeing a weapon. Or a threat. "You understand what you just read. You understand the implications." It wasn't a question. She knew too much. She had just become the most dangerous person in the room who wasn't him. She had seen the clan's private correspondence. She had deciphered their intent. In his world, knowledge like that was a death sentence. Or a cage. "I only translated the words, sir." "Do not call me sir," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You are no longer the janitor." He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray strand of her braided hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of ice and fire that shot through her entire body. It was not gentle. It was a claim. "You are a complication. And I do not allow complications to walk out my door." The door remained closed. The city outside was a galaxy away. She had made the mistake of showing him she had a mind. And now he was not going to let it go. He didn't take her to a cell. He took her higher. Up a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment that made the office below look like a waiting room. It was a world of brushed steel, black leather, and glass, a minimalist fortress suspended over the city. Armed guards stood, silent and motionless, in discreet alcoves. This wasn't a home, it was a gilded cage. "You will stay here," Kaido stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will be given clothes, food. You will continue your work. For me." Lena stood in the center of the massive living area, her janitor's uniform feeling like a costume from another life. "My work is mopping floors. Your work is language," he corrected, turning to face her. The light from the window carved his features into sharp planes and angles. "The Kyakuryakai are not the only ones who hide their intentions in poetry. You will read everything that comes across my desk. You'll listen to every call. You will be my shadow. A prisoner with a purpose." It was a more elegant form of captivity, but captivity nonetheless. The first few days were a blur of disorientation. She was given a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment, filled with clothes she could never afford and food prepared by a silent, stern woman who was likely as much a guard as a housekeeper. But the luxury was hollow. The windows didn't open. Her phone had been taken. She was utterly isolated. Kaido was a constant, unnerving presence. He would summon her at all hours, placing documents in front of her or patching her into phone calls, her ear pressed to a speaker as she translated whispered threats and brokered deals in real time. She became an extension of his will, a voice that gave clarity to the shadows he moved through. And she began to see the man beneath the monster. She saw the fierce, almost paternal loyalty he showed to his most trusted men. She saw the quiet discipline of his mornings, the solitary ritual of tea before the city woke up. And she saw the crack in his armor. It was a name. Akari. One night, a report came in. The Kyakuryakai had made their first move, not against Kaido, but against a smaller, affiliated family that ran the shipping imports at the docks, the trusted ally she had warned him about. The report was cold, clinical. The head of the family, his wife, and his top lieutenants, all executed. The news came with a photograph. A woman lay on the rain-slicked pavement, her dark hair fanned out around her head like a halo. Kaido went still. He stared at the image on the screen for a long, silent moment. Lena watched as something flickered in his eyes, a raw, unguarded agony that was gone as quickly as it appeared. "It is the same," he murmured, so softly she almost didn't hear it. "He used the same method." "He?" Lena asked, her voice quiet. Kaido looked away from the screen, his jaw tight. "Ruji. The man who leads the Kyakuryakai now. He was a lieutenant years ago. He learned his trade by watching his master." He paused, his gaze becoming distant, lost in a memory that was clearly painful. "He was there the night they took Akari." The name hung in the air between them. He had never spoken it before. "She was my predecessor," he said, the word inadequate. "She ran the organization's finances. She was brilliant, meticulous, but she trusted the wrong person, a rival boss who swore allegiance. I warned her. I told her his promises were poison," his hands clenched into fists on the desk. "I was supposed to be there. At the meeting. I was delayed. By the time I arrived," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The shame radiated from him, a cold, dark energy. He had failed to protect someone, and he had never forgiven himself. The iron control he maintained was a penance. Suddenly, a siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Kaido's head snapped up, his focus instantly returning to the present. His second-in-command, a grim-faced man named Ishida, burst into the room. "They're here," Ishida said, his voice urgent. "They bypassed the lobby security. They're coming up the service elevators." Ruji wasn't just sending a message. He was launching a full frontal assault. Kaido moved with blinding speed, pulling a sleek, black handgun from a locked desk drawer. He turned to Lena, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "Stay with Ishida. Do exactly as he says." The penthouse erupted into controlled chaos. Guards moved into tactical positions. The sound of gunfire echoed from the elevator bank, sharp cracks that shattered the sterile silence. Ishida grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her toward a reinforced door hidden behind a bookshelf. "This way." the panic room. But as he pulled her, she saw it. Through the chaos, a side door leading to a maintenance stairwell had been left ajar. One of the guards, loyal to Kaido, had been shot and lay motionless beside it. It was an escape, a clear path out. Freedom. She could run, disappear into the Tokyo night, and never look back. Her heart pounded. Go, her survival instinct screamed. This is your only chance. But she hesitated. She looked back and saw Kaido, a silhouette against the flashing emergency lights. He moved through the violence not with panic, but with a terrifying grace, his shots precise, economical. But there were too many of them. Ruji's men were pouring in, a tide of black suits and flashing steel. Kaido was being pushed back, overwhelmed. In that split second, her mind, so used to finding patterns, saw one. She remembered the building schematics she'd once seen pinned up in the janitor's closet. The fire suppression system for the West Wing was on a separate, older circuit. If triggered, it would deploy a disorienting level of foam and sound an alarm loud enough to deafen a person. It was a system flaw, one she'd noted in a maintenance log that had probably been ignored for years. She made a choice. She wrenched her arm from Ishida's grasp. The fire alarm, she shouted over the din, on the west wall. It will disorient them. Ishida looked at her, stunned. But there was no time to argue. She darted away from him, a moving target in a firefight. She scrambled toward the west wall, bullets whizzing past her. She slammed her hand against the red alarm box. The effect was instantaneous. A deafening klaxon blared, and thick, white foam began spewing from vents in the ceiling, filling the corridor with a blinding, choking cloud. Ruji's men, caught by surprise, faltered. Their assault lost its cohesion. It was the opening Kaido needed. He and his men pressed their advantage, the sounds of the fight now muffled and chaotic within the foam. The immediate danger passed. The foam receded, leaving a slick, chemical-smelling residue on everything. Kaido stood amidst the wreckage, his suit immaculate despite the chaos. His men were securing the remaining intruders. He walked toward her, his expression unreadable. He stopped just in front of her, the space between them charged with adrenaline and the metallic scent of blood. "You could have run," he said, his voice low and rough. That door led to the street. Lena's breath was still coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't form a coherent answer. All she could do was look at him, at the man who was both her captor and the person she had just chosen not to abandon. "Why?" he pressed, his gaze boring into her. "Why didn't you run?" She finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "I don't know." He reached out, his thumb gently brushing away a smudge of soot from her cheek. His touch was no longer a claim of ownership. It was something else, something more complex and dangerous. A question. An acknowledgement. The silence stretched, thick with everything that had just happened, and everything that was about to. The failed attack on the penthouse changed the equation. Ruji now knew Kaido had a new asset. He no longer saw a janitor who got lucky. He saw a strategist, an unknown variable in Kaido's fortress. And that made Lena a primary target. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a piece on the board, and Ruji intended to take her off it. Kaido's security around her tightened to a suffocating degree. She was never alone. Ishida or another trusted guard was a constant shadow. The gilded cage now felt like a vault. But the real change was in Kaido himself. The professional distance he'd maintained was gone, replaced by a watchful, possessive intensity. He would find reasons to be in the same room, observing her as she worked, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. He started saying her name differently. It wasn't a summons anymore. It was a sound he seemed to test on his tongue, a low murmur that made the hair on her arms stand up. One afternoon, Kaido's men brought in a captive, one of Ruji's top enforcers, captured during a raid on a warehouse. They needed information about Ruji's next move. But the man was defiant. He spat curses at his captors, but not in standard Japanese. He spoke in a rare, almost dead dialect from a remote northern island. Kaido's translators were useless. Kaido sent for Lena. She was led into a cold, concrete room in the sublevels of the building. The enforcer was tied to a chair, his face bruised but his eyes filled with hate. "I need to know what he's saying," Kaido said, his voice devoid of emotion. Lena's stomach churned. This was different from translating documents. This was participating. "I can't." "You can," Kaido stated, his eyes locking with hers. "The information he has will tell us how Ruji plans to strike next."
"He will not target me.
"He will target you. This man's words are the only thing standing between you and a bullet. So, you will listen." His logic was a cold, sharp blade. He was making her complicit in her own protection. Shaking, she stepped forward. She listened as the man spoke, his words a torrent of defiance. She translated his insults, his boasts that Ruji's plan was already in motion and that the foreign woman would be the first to pay the price for Kaido's arrogance. Then Kaido began to speak. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He described, in calm, methodical detail, exactly what he would do to the man's family, his aging parents, his beloved older sister, if he did not cooperate. Lena felt sick. Her voice trembled as she translated the cold, surgical threats. She was no longer an observer. She was the bridge, the conduit for this brutal transaction. She saw the moment the enforcers will broke, the terror flooding his eyes as her voice delivered Kaido's promise of ruin. He talked. He gave them everything: the location, the time, the target. A charity gala for the city's elite. Ruji planned to hit it, not to kill Kaido, but to abduct Lena in the ensuing chaos. Afterward, Lena stumbled back to her suite, her hand shaking. She felt tainted, as if the coldness of that room had seeped into her bones. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. A short time later, Kaido appeared in her doorway. He held 2 glasses and a bottle of expensive whiskey. He didn't speak, just poured a glass and handed it to her. She took it, her fingers numb. "What you did in that room," he said, his voice quiet as he leaned against the doorframe, "was necessary." "It was monstrous," she whispered, staring into the amber liquid. "My world is monstrous," he replied, without apology. He took a sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving her face. "It is built on necessity. On doing what other men will not." He paused, and his next words were heavy, as if they were being pulled from a great depth. "I have not felt the need to protect someone like this in Sakari." He looked down at his glass, his knuckles white. "It is inconvenient." It wasn't a confession of love.
It was something far more raw and honest.
An admission of a weakness she had carved into him. A vulnerability he hated and couldn't excise. It was the most dangerous, intimate thing he had ever said. The next day, the threat became terrifyingly personal. A courier delivered a small, lacquered box to Kaido. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a single, perfect photograph. It was of Lena, walking in the small, walled garden on the penthouse roof, a place she had thought was completely secure. She was smiling, a rare, genuine smile as she tilted her face to the sun. It had been taken that morning. Beneath the photo was a note, written in elegant calligraphy. "Everything you value will be turned to ash." The war was no longer about territory or honor. It was about her. The night of the gala arrived like a death sentence. The air in the penthouse was thick with the hum of preparation. Men in dark suits checked weapons with quiet efficiency. Kaido was planning to use the event as a trap of his own, to draw Ruji out and end the conflict permanently. His plan was to leave Lena in the penthouse, locked down with his most elite guards. It was the logical, tactical move. But Lena couldn't breathe. For days, she had been poring over every piece of intelligence they had on Ruji, every translated document, every intercepted call, the terrified ramblings of the captured enforcer. A pattern was emerging, a ghost of a strategy that Kaido, in his focus on a direct confrontation, was missing. Ruji always created a diversion, a loud, violent spectacle to draw his enemy's eyes, while the real attack, the killing blow, came from an unexpected, quiet direction. The gala wasn't the trap. It was the distraction. Kaido was walking into an ambush. She had to warn him, But when she tried to approach him, Ishida blocked her path. "The boss has given his orders. You are to remain here. It is for your safety." They wouldn't listen. To them, she was a translator, a valuable asset but not a strategist. They would see her warning as the fear of an amateur. Frustration and terror warred within her. She couldn't let him walk to his death. She had to find another way. Her mind raced, sifting through details. And then it hit her. The venue, the Asakura Grand Hall. A historical building known for its blend of classic architecture and modern renovations. She had been there once, with a university class, long before her life had taken this turn. She remembered a detail from the tour. The building's original foundation had been damaged in a minor earthquake years ago and retrofitted with seismic dampeners. The access panels for those systems were in the sub-level parking garage, an area Kaido's men would sweep, but not occupy. Ryuji wouldn't attack the gala from the front. He would attack Kaido's motorcade in the garage as he was leaving, using the chaos upstairs as cover. She couldn't send a message about an ambush. It would be dismissed. She had to create a physical imperative, a problem that would force Kaido's men to change their plan without question. She found one of the secure terminal laptops left unattended in the office. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the public schematics of the Asakura Hall. She found what she was looking for, the maintenance protocols for the seismic dampeners. With a few keystrokes, she triggered a low-level diagnostic alert, an error message that would be flagged by Kaido's security team during their final sweep. It would report a critical pressure failure in the dampener system directly beneath the VIP exit in the west garage. It was a lie, but a plausible one. A structural threat would override all other protocols. It would be flagged as an unacceptable risk. They would be forced to reroute Kaido's departure to the east garage, away from the kill zone Ryuji had undoubtedly set up. She sent the anonymous alert to Ishida's secure comms channel, masking it as an automated building management notification. Then, she could do nothing but wait. Hours later, the penthouse was eerily quiet. Lena paced the floor, her heart a frantic drum. Then, the sound of the private elevator whirred to life. The doors opened. Kaido stood there. He was alone. His suit was torn at the shoulder, and there was a fresh, angry cut over his eyebrow. But he was alive. He walked toward her, his eyes dark and intense. He didn't say a word until he was standing directly in front of her. The west garage was rigged with enough explosives to level the entire foundation, he said, his voice a low growl. Ryuji and his men were waiting. They were caught completely off guard when we exited from the east. An anonymous structural alert diverted my team at the last minute. He stared at her, and she saw in his eyes that he knew. He knew it was her. "My world is not safe for you," he said, the words rough with an emotion he couldn't hide. The violence of the night was still clinging to him. "But it is no longer my world without you in it."
He wasn't asking her to stay.
He was telling her the truth of their situation. The choice was hers, but the board was set. To leave now would be to run forever, not just from Ryuji's remnants, but from the ghost of this life, this man. To stay meant embracing the darkness, accepting that her hands would never be clean again. The price of safety with him was her old self, the woman who just mopped floors and dreamed of a quiet life. That woman was already gone. He finally acknowledged the cost.
Ryuji is gone.
But there will always be another. Staying with me means this will be your life. Lena didn't give him a verbal answer. The time for words, for translation, was over. He had turned and was now looking out the vast window at the sprawling kingdom of neon and shadow that was his Tokyo. His reflection was stark against the glass, a solitary king in his tower. She walked to him, her footsteps silent on the cold floor. Her reflection appeared beside his, two figures silhouetted against the night. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, her fingers resting directly over the intricate, scaled body of the dragon tattooed on his skin. It felt like touching destiny. It was a silent acceptance, a choice made. The city glittered below, indifferent and beautiful, a dangerous, sprawling promise they would now face together.